still can't sing that without going to Go West. I just have to kind of slide that way. When I first came to Brighton, one of the first public meetings I attended was actually in this room, and it was a real humdinger. And for the life of me, I can't remember what it was about, but I remember there was a lot of finger pointing and a lot of very deeply held views. And watching the meeting progress was like watching a train crash in slow motion. And the voices became louder, the chair had lost control. Finola put her hand up to speak. And she began quietly, and as Finola began to talk, others began to listen. And after a minute or two, she had the meeting completely under control, and then very subtly handed it back to the chair. And I think most people were too wrapped up in the arguments to actually notice what Finola did. But I was very impressed. I was very, very impressed. So over the years, our paths have crossed many times, and on each occasion, I found Finola an absolute delight to talk to, and always worth listening to. In a heated argument, she has a wonderfully refreshing point of view. It's like a tall glass of common sense, which I have to say isn't very common. So, working on the Older and Out advisory group, the Working to Connect management committee, and of course as the chair of the Rainbow Chorus, earlier this year, Finola was the very first person to receive the Golden Handbag Lifetime Achievement Award in recognition It is my great pleasure this evening to welcome to our pulpit Finola Brophy.
And you can see me over the pulpit. So thank you, Mike. And thank you all for inviting me here to your church, which does an awful lot of work in the local community, and I'm really aware of that. Also, thank you for that beautiful reading of Desiderata. I'm going to start, actually, by repeating a bit of it, which is, you are the child of the universe, no less than the trees and the stars. You have a right to exist and be here, and whether or not it is clear to you, no doubt the universe is unfolding as it should. You've had a month about stewardship, and I'm the last person, I think, to talk about that theme and what it means in practice. And last week you had Caroline Lucas. I mean, fancy getting me here after. There are lots of definitions of stewardship, but I think it's really an ethic. It's an ethic that embodies the responsible planning and management of resources. The concepts of stewardship can be applied to all sorts of things, including the environment and nature, economics, health, property, service provision. I was at a music festival up in Whitby last week. There was lots of folk going around with red t-shirts on with steward on, looking really important. I thought, oh God, I could use that in my speech here today. Information, theology, and community development, which is my background. I've never described myself as a steward, and I was really quite surprised when Mike asked me to come and speak to you about this here today. But I do believe that I have a responsibility to do my best to use my skills and my knowledge and my experience to make this world a better place. This is sometimes exhausting as well as empowering, and my approach and my relentless determination to do good, whether you like it or not, can be really irritating to other people, and actually to myself as well, especially when I'm trying to juggle too many things. We are all shaped by our families, our backgrounds, culture, education, religion, environment, history, and so much more. I was lucky to be born into a loving Irish working-class Roman Catholic family with strong cultural and religious roots. My parents came from rural Ireland and came to England during the Second World War to work as a nurse and a navvy. Guess which one was which? My dad was illegitimate, and spent much of his early childhood in the poorhouse in Kilkenny. And my mother had 9 sisters and 3 brothers, and the boys inherited what little property there was. It's no wonder I'm a feminist. They met in Birmingham and moved to St Albans in Hertfordshire, where my mum worked in a large psychiatric hospital until she had children. And my dad eventually started his own successful landscape gardening business. They had 5 children. We thought that was a small family compared to some of our cousins. I've got 3 brothers and 1 sister, and I'm particularly close to my sister Anne, who lives in Sheffield, and my brother Martin, who is gay, lives with his husband, I could say partner there, but his husband now, in Brighton and in London. And he is also involved in the international LGBT+ choral movement. And in fact, he got an MBE for his services to voluntary work to the LGBT community. And he was the first person in the voluntary sector to get that specifically. So I'm really proud to be his sister. I think he's quite proud to be my brother as well. I had a happy but not idyllic childhood. There were times of hardship, illness, alcoholism, sadness, disappointment, etc., etc. But our home was always open to anyone needing a meal, or a bed for the night, or even longer. We topped and tailed and were put all over the place. Or maybe just someone to talk to. We didn't have much, but what we had was shared, and visitors came first. Not just the newly arrived Irish people, who somehow or other always seemed to have our address, nor the tramps who used to put a special mark on our house as they went around the country, knowing that they could get food at our address. But to lonely men my dad met in the pub and brought home, drunk or otherwise, and to elderly neighbours who needed a cup of tea or their shopping done. There was little money, and I can remember well the humiliation of queuing separately for free school meals and all of those systems that were in place to make us feel different. Despite, or maybe because, he had a very, very poor formal education, my father's favourite book was The Ragged-Trousered Philanthropists. And my mother was forever organising jumble sales, door-to-door collections, committee meetings and social events, and she was an active volunteer for Oxfam, Al-Anon, MenCap, the Catholic Women's League, and many, many more over the years. Both my parents helped people, and they instilled in all of us children a belief that caring and being charitable were good things to do. They were both determined to make sure that we had what they didn't when they were children, a good education and good shoes. There was also lots of singing and parties when I was growing up. It was no wonder that I trained as a social worker and community worker. I was the first person in my family to get a degree, and my first job was in Glasgow, just up from the Gorbals. I was 22 years old, trooping around rat-ridden streets, and I mean that literally, in my long red tapestry coat with a stream of kids behind me, thinking I was a princess. What was I doing? Well, actually, what I was doing was sectioning people with mental health issues and taking children into care from these slums. They didn't stand a chance. I soon rejected one-to-one casework and became a group worker and a community worker. My passion for setting up systems and organisations that help people to empower themselves felt right. There was nowhere better to look at the bigger picture than the bigger political picture than in Glasgow at that time, or maybe even now. It was the home of the 784 Theatre Company, named to acknowledge that at that time 7% of the nation's wealth was owned by 84% No, it's the other way round, isn't it? It's the other way round. Of course, we know that, and actually it's worse today. It's worse today. In Glasgow, I had the best time, and I made friends for a lifetime. I moved to London in 1977, and I worked in Harleston Community Project in Brent for 11 years, until I was made redundant as part of the radical local government cuts by Maggie Thatcher. I was an active trade unionist, and I'd negotiated maternity and paternity agreements, all sorts of things, as well as avidly defending workers' rights. I worked up the road, literally, from Grumwicks. Racism was rife, sexism endemic, disability rights were not on the agenda, and sexuality was pretty closeted. Trans and non-binary awareness was non-existent. Now, I'm aware that I'm describing my life through the jobs I've done, as I think most of us do. And I know that I've been really fortunate to have been employed for most of my adult life. Without spelling it all out, because there's a bit more, I continued to work in 4 London local authority boroughs as a fostering and adoption worker and as a women's officer in 3 different boroughs. I think I'm the only person to do that. A note of historical sadness, I was the last head of a women's unit in the country, and that was in Islington. Some of them had merged into equalities units and others just disappeared. That's because we're all equal now. I then joined Camden and Islington Health Authority and later Islington Primary Care Trust as a senior manager, shaping and commissioning services around health and social care and encouraging whole systems thinking and planning. They were astounded by the notion that if people running services talked to each other and to the communities they served, they might actually come up with some creative solutions to some of the problems that were around. It was really quite innovative, and consequently I found myself in a pretty senior job by the time I actually got cancer. I took ill health retirement after my first bout of breast cancer, and I didn't think that I would ever be fit to work again, to do paid work. But some years later, after my second bout of cancer, and after myself and my partner Liz had moved to Worthing, I returned to paid employment part-time in the Carers Centre in Brighton, working with carers of people with dementia, which was just amazing. I then worked with Age Concern and with community service volunteers, developing and managing the Lifelines volunteering project, based mainly at Patching Lodge up the road, empowering older people to self-organise. I retired when I was 60. Over the years I've done all sorts of things in a voluntary capacity, from being a school governor, to supporting Asian women's groups, to running street parties, and I've been an active campaigner, an active feminist and equalities campaigner, especially around women's and LGBT+ rights. When I fell in love with my partner Liz, almost 28 years ago, my world imploded. And the straight world closed ranks and made my life hell for quite a while. I'd married young to a man I did love. It was the done thing in those days. And I had 2 young children. I'd already rejected Catholicism and Christianity in my early 20s as sexist and oppressive institutions. And I still think that is the case today, although I am aware the audience I'm speaking to. But that didn't stop the wrath of the established institutions, bringing down their wrath on me from both sides of the family. I lost my home, some friends, and my family was split for many, many years. I was accused of causing my father's death because I came out as a lesbian, and of harming my children. In my High Court case, my divorce case, I very nearly lost custody, complete custody of my children, solely because of my sexuality. I've never been in the closet since, and I am now out and proud and very loud as a lesbian. My children were brought up in two very loving homes with some very different priorities and beliefs. They are lovely, and they have their own issues, and they're now 35 and 33, and they appear to be as straight as anything, so much for my bad influence. Myself and Liz are now grannies, Lily and Lola, and we love it. Thinking about stewardship and what we look after and pass on, surely our most valuable resource is our children. Not just our own birth children, but all the children and young people who are the future of our world. We have a duty to challenge inequality, prejudice and discrimination wherever it exists. We also understand and know what homo, bi, transphobia looks like, feels like and tastes like. And we have a duty to pass on that knowledge and to challenge it wherever it exists. Yeah. We can help to create a world where such oppression is banished. I am minded of On Children from the Prophet by Khalil Gibran. Your children are not your children. They are the sons and the daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, yet they belong not to you. In some ways, I'm really old-fashioned, and I believe that children and others learn by example. People are never too old or too young to be challenged appropriately and sensitively. The way that we all communicate and treat people does have a direct effect on what we get back in return. Actions do speak louder than words, and respecting difference is an ongoing challenge for all of us. As some of you know, one of the things I presently do is chair the Rainbow Chorus in Brighton, at least until tomorrow night, when I step down after 5 years. In my time as chair, the choir has more than doubled in size. It's become a registered charity, and it's increased the number of community and charitable gigs that we do. One of the reasons why I love the Rainbow Chorus is because the people who join us don't just love singing, but they want to make a difference too. They want to stand up and be counted at Ida Hobbit, at Trans Pride, at World AIDS Day. They want to be part of an LGBT plus community choir that welcomes everyone that can more or less sing in tune. And they want to support others and be supported when they need it. They also see the bigger picture and support the work that I'm doing with others, locally, nationally and internationally, to make connections worldwide through the LGBT plus choral movement. So if there's any men or anyone trans or BME out there, or anyone who wants to join us, then, please let me know afterwards. And do come along and hear us at our Christmas concert on the 9th. I have to do a bit of plugging. I do want to say that we are really, in case you don't know it, I realise this is like teaching you all to suck eggs, but we are really lucky in Brighton. I know there's lots of issues, but I was recently in Warsaw a couple of weekends ago at a European gathering of people representing the LGBT plus choirs. And the oppression was palpable. People experience overt discrimination and hatred. The venues that we had organised for our gathering were cancelled. The restaurants at the last minute refused to take our bookings, and people regularly get beaten up. In these oppressive times, it is even more important to spread the rainbow message of inclusiveness and diversity. Now, I'm involved, as Mike said, in a number of other LGBT plus organisations in the city. This is an exciting and challenging time for our communities in Brighton and beyond. And it's a time of change in the face of austerity and adversity. The choirs are now working much closer together. The Rainbow Fund is supporting many creative and innovative projects. The Trans Alliance is bringing lots of trans groups together. The Community Safety Forum is increasingly proactive. And the Working to Connect LGBT Small Groups Network is supporting and encouraging groups to collaborate and work together. There is greater awareness of the issues facing the older LGBT plus community, including loneliness and isolation, housing and care needs, depression, poverty, bereavement, and more. There are still lots of issues and divisions across our own communities, but working together, we are stronger. I was going to read out Maya Angelou's poem, A Rock, a River, a Tree, as it so eloquently connects our human interaction with the natural world and our abuse of its resources, and the consequences that result in our abuses. And this was so clearly spelt out by Caroline Lucas last week. But it's a long and complex poem, so Mike has very kindly photocopied it for you, and I don't plan on reading it at the moment, you'll be pleased to hear. We are all standing on the shoulders of those who came before us, and they paid a far greater price than we do to stand up for what was right. Not just for LGBT plus people, but for all the oppressed and downtrodden in the world. As stewards, we must try and leave the world in a better shape for our successors than it was handed over to us. We can all contribute in whatever way we are able to, for however long, however large, however small, whatever we can do to make a difference. I'm going to finish now with a very familiar but no less meaningful statement from the late Joe Cox MP. We are far more united and have far more in common with each other than that which divides us.